developing countries around the world seek ways to stimulate their economy, not only so that they can experience economic growth, but also in order to enhance the standard of living of the country's people. Economic development happens when a country's standard of living increases.
Most people in the developing world live on less than $1 a day.
We'll let people know that the amount of lunch money they spend every day can feed a family in Africa for like a week.
There is actually enough food in the world, it's just that it's not being distributed correctly.
People living on the streets, people who don't have any homes.
They don't have any monies, they don't have any food to eat, like it's limited.
Amartya Sen, an Indian economist of the 20th century, said that development can be seen, it is argued here, as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy. Focusing on human freedoms contrasts with narrower views of development, with a gross national product, or with the rise in personal incomes, or with industrialization, or with technological advance, or with social modernization. The Human Development Index measures economic development, and it takes into consideration things like child mortality, levels of health and education. The factors for development include improving and increasing natural factors of production, human capital factors, physical capital and technological factors, and institutional factors such as a structured legal system and an adequate infrastructure.
On the other hand, economic growth is defined as an increase in the quality or quantity of a country's factors of production. The gross domestic product, or GDP, is a measure of economic growth, and it measures national expenditure, national income, or national output. There are two main ways in which countries can grow: through trade liberalization or protectionism. It is important to note that economic growth does not always lead to economic development. This video will talk about how less economically developed countries can grow using a strategy known as import-led substitution, which is based on the concept of protectionism. Protectionism is when governments restrict free trade by imposing trade barriers on imports. The forms of protectionism include subsidies, tariffs, quotas, and administrative barriers, such as embargoes, red tape, and the imposition of health, safety, or environmental standards.
This enables the world to produce more goods, and more kinds of goods than it otherwise could. Since World War II, international trade has increased 17-fold, helping to ignite economic growth around the globe. Despite the obvious benefits of free trade, there are many who are motivated to limit it. Tariffs, trade bans, and quota restrictions can be used as weapons to punish competing and opposing nations. This could lead to retaliation and a devastating trade war.
A subsidy is an amount of money paid by the government to a firm per unit of output. This causes the supply curve to shift from S to S1, creating a new equilibrium point. This causes the price to decrease from P to P1 and the imported goods to decrease from Q1 and Q2 to Q3 and Q2.
A tariff is a tax imposed on imported goods. As a result of a tariff, the world price will go up from WP to WP plus tariff. This will decrease the amount of exports from Q1, Q2 to Q3, Q4. Finally, a quota is a physical limit on the number or value of goods that can be imported into a country. A quota will make the domestic supply curve shift out from S to S1. As a result, the price will go down from P to P1, and the level of imports will decrease from Q1, Q2 to Q3, Q2. The value of the quota is Q1, Q3. This will create excess demand. With the quota, domestic producers will now have to supply Q3, Q2, as well as Q1. Import substitution industrialization, or ISI, is a strategy that says that a developing country should produce goods domestically rather than import them. Like this, domestic firms will be able to grow, and because GDP measures national output, an increase in national output will lead to economic growth. As a result, these firms will gain from economies of scale, so they will be able to lower cost of production and be more competitive with foreign goods. However, there are some necessary conditions. The government must adopt a policy of organizing the selection of goods to produce domestically. Historically, shoes and clothing, as they are low-skilled manufactured goods. They must also provide subsidies to encourage domestic industries. And finally, the government must implement a protectionist system with tariff barriers to limit foreign imports.
There are a couple of advantages to the strategy of import-led substitution. For example, it protects product standards. It also protects the jobs in the domestic market, the economy from low-cost labor, and it also protects the sunrise and sunset industries, which are more vulnerable to fluctuations in demand. The import-led substitution strategy prevents dumping, which affects local producers. It avoids risk of over-specialization. Since this strategy essentially calls for a self-sufficient economy that produces all necessary products. Furthermore, it protects local culture and social habits by isolating the economy from foreign influence. It protects the economy from the power and bad influence of multinational corporations or MNCs, like this, preventing exploitation. Finally, it corrects the balance of payment deficit, since there would be less imports than exports. However, if retaliation occurs, this might not be what actually happens.
On the other hand, there are many disadvantages to this strategy that any economy must take into consideration before implementing it. First of all, consumers will suffer from higher prices and less choice. Producers who rely on foreign raw materials will also experience higher prices, resulting in an increase in the cost of production. As a result, the aggregate supply curve will shift from AS to AS1. The new equilibrium point will push the prices up from P to P1, leading to high rates of inflation. This type of inflation is known as cost-push inflation. Also, economic growth may be lower due to the protectionist measures, as we can see that the GDP goes down from Q to Q1. As a result of the absence of growth, there will be a lack of job creation. Also, the economy doesn't enjoy the benefits from a comparative advantage and specialization, leading to an inefficient production of goods and services instead of importing products from foreign producers who would produce these more efficiently. It could also lead to inefficient domestic industries due to the lack of competition to encourage research and development. Finally, it could cause retaliation in the form of protectionist measures against the developing countries. If the prices of both increased because of the retaliation, these countries might not be able to develop. Also, it may lead to a budget deficit, since government spending could be greater than tax revenue.
In real life, import-led substitution has been implemented in countries in South America, Asia, and Africa. These include Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Uruguay, India, Nigeria, and Kenya.
These policies were successful in the 1960s and 1970s. However, they failed in the early 1980s due to government overspending and debt crisis, which led to the inability of governments to repay the loans that they had taken. As a result, many of these countries were forced to ask the IMF for aid.
Although there are many advantages to the import-led substitution strategy, in real life, the countries stated before continue to be, after more than 30 years, developing countries.
Fairy